In the endless silence of space, a desperate mother launches her newborn child into a dying nebula, unaware that ancient dragons wait within the storm. What begins as abandonment soon becomes the spark of destiny, as a fragile human infant is raised among fire-breathing guardians to face a darkness that threatens the very fabric of the galaxy. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Now let's jump into the story. The Black Sea of space shivered with fire. Streaks of red lightning tore across the void as the flagship of the Orion Alliance, the Dawnspire, drifted into chaos. The once proud ship had been the heart of the fleet, its silver hull a symbol of strength. But now it was under siege. An endless swarm of insectoid warships closed in, their jagged bodies glowing with a sickly green light. Every explosion that tore through the Dawnspire's walls echoed like the toll of a great bell, each blast a warning of the end. Inside the narrow corridors, alarms screamed and lights flickered. Smoke filled the air, carrying the sharp smell of burned metal and fear. Soldiers rushed to their stations, engineers shouted orders, and the young medic Celine clutched her newborn son close against her chest. The child's name was Lior, and his tiny cries rose above the thunder of destruction. His wails were not of fear alone. They sounded defiant, like the fragile heartbeat of hope in the middle of despair. The command rang out through the intercom. Abandon ship. The words turned the hearts of the crew to stone. They knew there were not enough escape pods, not enough time, not enough mercy in the universe to save them all. Celine's hands trembled as she looked down at Lior. She knew the truth with a clarity sharper than the fire outside. She could not survive this night. But maybe her son could. She ran through the collapsing hallways, searching for any pod that still held a chance. The ship shuddered again, and a piece of ceiling crashed to the floor behind her, showering sparks. She found a half-broken pod, its metal bent, wires hanging loose, systems barely alive. It was no more than a coffin of steel and smoke, but it was the only hope she had. Celine placed Lior inside, wrapping him in the only blanket she carried, soft but worn, smelling faintly of lavender from home. She whispered to him through tears. Her voice was low, steady, filled with both fear and love. She begged the stars to hear her prayer, though she had no reason to believe the stars cared. She kissed his forehead, her tears falling onto his tiny skin, and with hands that shook but refused to fail, she sealed the pod. With a deep breath, she pressed the launch. The pod shot from the dying ship into the unknown, spinning through the fire of battle. Celine's heart broke as the small vessel disappeared into the storm. She collapsed against the ruined wall, the roar of war drowning her last sobs, knowing she had given all she could give. The pod tumbled into the Veil Nebula, a place shrouded in myth. Even the bravest captains avoided its shifting clouds, where violet and crimson lights twisted through endless storms. Some said the nebula was haunted, others swore it was home to ancient guardians. Most dismissed the tales as myths, stories born from fear and radiation dreams. Yet the nebula was alive, and it was waiting. The pod spun helplessly, its hull cracked, sparks trailing behind like a falling star. Inside, Lior whimpered softly, unaware of the legends surrounding him. The nebula pulsed with strange beauty. Glowing rivers of dust and gas swirling like a painter's brush across the sky. Hidden within that living storm, something stirred. Vaynor, a dragon older than entire empires, drifted through the mists. Her scales shimmered with the blue of frozen oceans. Her wings glittered with patterns of stars. For centuries she had wandered in silence, her heart closed by sorrow, her kind sworn to secrecy. But as she glided through the nebulous currents, her golden eyes caught the faint spark of the falling pod. Curiosity flickered in her chest, a feeling she had not known in countless years. She circled the pod, watching its metal shell tremble against the pull of the nebula. She could have let it fall, as dragons had sworn to do, never interfering with the affairs of humans. But as the pod cracked open, a sound reached her ears, a fragile cry, trembling but strong. Vaynar's great claws carefully peeled back the broken shell. Inside lay the child, pale skin glowing faintly in the nebula's light, dark hair pressed against the blanket. His eyes were shut, his breaths shallow, yet he lived. His tiny hand reached out, brushing against the dragon's scale. The touch was impossibly small, yet it pierced through her like fire and memory. She felt something awaken within her, not duty, not law, but a promise she had fought forgotten. She had seen galaxies fall, stars collapse, hope vanish again and again. Yet here was a child who had survived where no one should. Vayner cradled the baby in her massive claws. The nebulous storms howled around her, but inside her chest burned a quiet certainty. Against the ancient laws of her kin, against her own grief and solitude, she made a choice. She would not let him die. She would raise him. She would protect him. As she soared deeper into the nebula with the child pressed close, the storm seemed to calm for a moment, as if the universe itself paused to witness. Yet beneath the calm, a shadow lingered. Vayner felt it even as she flew, the sense that this child's path would not be simple. His survival carried weight, a destiny tied to darkness far beyond the krill swarm that had destroyed his people. The Dawnspire had fallen. Its fire would be remembered only as another lost battle in the endless wars. But from its ashes, through a single act of love and a dragon's defiance, a story had begun. One day, the child abandoned in fire would be known not as a victim, but as something far greater. The Veil Nebula was no ordinary place. It glowed with colors that no human eye on Earth had ever seen. Rivers of crimson gas flowed into pools of violet mist. Great arcs of golden light bent and twisted as if gravity itself danced in strange rhythms. Hidden deep within this mysterious realm was a sanctuary known only to dragons, a refuge carved into a colossal asteroid. It was here that Vayner carried the fragile child she had rescued from the broken pod. Vaynar's lair was not a dark cave as human myths suggested. It was a living city of stone and crystal, sculpted by centuries of dragon fire and patience. Towers shaped like spires of frozen light reached into the nebulous haze. Chambers glowed with soft crystals that pulsed like living hearts. It was here that Lyre, the abandoned child, would begin a life unlike any other. At first, the other dragons resisted. They circled Vayner with suspicious eyes, their voices heavy with doubt. Why protect a human? Why break the law of isolation? But when they saw the small infant grasping Vaynar's claw without fear, something stirred even in the oldest hearts. Lyre's cries echoed in their stone halls, and though strange, it reminded them of life beyond loss. Vayner raised him with fierce devotion. She fed him with what she could gather from rare fruits hidden in the nebula's drifting gardens. She wrapped him in scales shed from her wings, soft and strong, keeping him safe from the cold void. When he stumbled, she guided him. When he laughed, she listened with quiet awe, for she had not heard laughter in centuries. As years passed, Lyre grew strong, though always different. He did not have wings, But Vaynor crafted a harness for him, woven from dragon silk and metal fragments salvaged from wrecked ships. With it, he learned to glide through the currents of the nebula. The dragons marveled as he soared alongside them, his laughter ringing like music across the air. They taught him their language, a speech of roars, growls, and melodies that vibrated in the very bones of the nebula. Lyre learned to understand the stars as they did, reading the winds of cosmic dust, sensing the storms that twisted through space. He was eager, curious, and never afraid to ask questions, even when the answers were difficult. One dragon above all others took special interest in him. Kalor, a massive beast with scales as black as obsidian, had been a warrior once. He had fought in battles against the same enemies who destroyed the Dawnspire. His scars ran deep, both in body and in heart. He had lost a companion long ago, a bond that no human could ever understand. Yet when he saw Lyre training, stumbling, then rising again, Kalor felt something awaken in him. Kalor became his mentor. His methods were harsh. He demanded perfection in combat drills, pushed Lyre beyond his limits, and never allowed him to forget that survival required strength. Weakness is a luxury you cannot afford. Kalor growled during every lesson, his voice like stone grinding against stone. But behind the fierce exterior was care, a belief that this human boy could become more than anyone imagined. Days turned into years. Lyre learned to wield blades forged from dragon flame, light enough for his human hands, strong enough to cut through the armor of enemies. He mastered aerial maneuvers, riding thermal currents in his harness until his movements mirrored the grace of wings. He absorbed the history of the dragons, their ancient songs and their deepest sorrows. And through it all, Vaynor watched with pride, her golden eyes glowing brighter with each passing day. Yet even in joy, shadows lingered. Lior sometimes asked about the world beyond the nebula. Why had his people abandoned him? Why had the war come? What future awaited him if he was neither dragon nor fully human? Vaynor answered with kindness, but often fell silent, for she feared the truth would come too soon. Still, the dragons began to see him not as an outsider, but as kin. They welcomed him at their councils, laughed when he outsmarted them in games of wit, and flew beside him in mock battles across the nebula skies. Lior became their bridge to something new, a reminder that the universe still held possibilities beyond pain. But beneath the warmth of family, fate prepared its hand. Kalor often warned him during training, "You must never think peace lasts forever. Enemies remember, darkness waits." Though Lyre nodded, part of him wondered if Kalor's warnings were just remnants of old battles. Yet the words lodged in his heart like embers waiting to flare. On the night of his 16th cycle, the dragons gathered for a celebration. They honored Lyre's growth with songs that shook the walls of the asteroid city. Fires danced in the skies, illuminating his smiling face as he stood between Vaynor and Kalor. But even as laughter filled the air, a chill passed through the nebula, a silent shift unnoticed by most. Only Vaynor's gaze lingered on the horizon, her heart uneasy. She looked at her son, now nearly grown, with pride and with fear. She knew what the others could not yet admit. Lyre's life was not an accident, not chance. The day would come when his origins would be revealed, and when that day came, his choices would shape not only the fate of dragons, but the survival of countless worlds. The child of dragons was no longer a helpless infant. He was becoming something far greater, and destiny was moving closer with every passing breath. The Veil Nebula had always been a place of wonder and danger. For years, Lyre had known it only as home, surrounded by dragons who had become his family. He had trained in their ways, learned their songs, and mastered their teachings. But destiny often arrives not with a whisper, but with a storm. On a routine patrol near the edges of the nebula, Lyre and Kalor glided across the shifting currents of dust and light. The silence was broken when Lyre spotted the wreckage of a krill bioship drifting against the glow of a dying star. Its twisted body was cracked open, trails of green mist leaking into the void. Curiosity tugged at him, though Kalor's instincts told him to leave it untouched. Still, Lyre pressed forward. Inside the wreckage, he discovered a half-functioning data core, its screen flickering with broken code. Against Kalor's warnings, Lyre powered it up. Fragments of messages appeared, distorted by static, but clear enough to chill his blood. They spoke of a secret program, a plan to fuse dragon strength with human adaptability. The words repeated again and again. Hybrid Forge Project. Asset retrieval. Lyre froze, his chest tightening. The words cut deeper than any blade. He was not simply a survivor found by chance. He was a creation of war, a weapon forged by desperate hands. The truth shook him to his core. Kalor's voice growled in the shadows. Leave it. The past carries poison. But Lyre could not. The seed of doubt had already rooted in his heart. Who was he? Was he truly the son Vaynor had raised, or just the outcome of an abandoned experiment? He returned to the sanctuary, the data core clutched in his hands. Vaynor waited for him at the edge of the great cavern, her golden eyes glowing with warmth and worry. Lyre's words tumbled out, his voice raw and unsteady. They called me part of a project, a hybrid forged from dragons and humans. Tell me it isn't true. The silence stretched long. Finally, Vaynor lowered her head, her breath heavy. She confessed the truth she had buried for years. During the darkest days of the Forgotten War, when humanity faced extinction at the claws of the krill, scientists had grown desperate. They had captured dragons, stolen their essence, and tried to create new warriors. She had been taken, her scales and blood harvested, her will broken. She had escaped, believing the project destroyed, the embryos lost. Her voice trembled with regret. I never knew they had succeeded. When I found you, I believed you were chance, a miracle. But it seems the shadows of that war have followed us. Lyre staggered under the weight of her words. He felt betrayed. Yet he could not hate the one who had raised him. His heart burned with confusion, torn between the love he carried for Vaynor and the anger that his very life had been engineered for battle. Kalor stepped forward, his eyes like burning coals. Your birth does not decide who you are. The krill made you, yes, but Vaynor raised you. She gave you a name, not a number. You are Lyre, not their weapon. But the shadows did not rest. As they argued, alarms echoed through the sanctuary. Dragons took to the skies, their roars cutting across the nebula. Scouts shouted warnings. An enemy fleet was approaching, larger than any they had seen before. The krill had found them. From the cavern's edge, Lyre saw the swarm pouring from the depths of the nebula. Hundreds of bioships shimmered with venomous light, their bodies twisting like predators on the hunt. This was not a random raid. It was a direct strike, aimed at the heart of the dragons, and at him. Vaynor's voice thundered across the halls. To arms! Defend our home! Her wings unfurled, her roar shaking the stone towers. Dragons of every size launched into the air, flames lighting the nebula like falling stars. But Lyre's heart was torn. The revelation still echoed in his mind. Was he truly their son, or simply bait that had led danger to their doorstep? Doubt and fear pressed against him like chains. But Kalor's voice broke through. You are not their prisoner. You are not their tool. You are ours, and this fight is yours as much as it is ours. Lawyer gripped the blade forged for him, the metal warm with the memory of dragon fire. He looked at Vaynor, whose eyes held sorrow but also unshaken love. In that moment, choice returned to him. He would not let the krill define him. He would not be their weapon. He would fight as the child of dragons, for the family that had given him life. The nebula erupted in fire and war. Bioships clashed against dragon wings, their claws rending metal, their roars drowning out the shrieks of the swarm. Vaynor's flames scorched the sky. Kalor's black body tore through enemy lines, and Lior joined them, his blade flashing with human skill and dragon-trained strength. But the battle was only the beginning. Deep within the swarm, something larger stirred. A command ship pulsed with strange energy. Its body unlike the others, its purpose clear. It had not come simply to destroy. It had come to reclaim. As Lior struck down one foe after another, his gaze fixed on the looming shadow of the command ship, he understood then what the krill wanted. Not their death, not their home, but him. They had created him, and now they would stop at nothing to take him back. The truth was harsh, and it left him shaken, but one thought burned brighter than all the rest. He had a choice, and in this choice, his destiny would be written not by those who made him, but by the fire he carried within. The shadows of the forgotten war had risen again, but so too had the will of one boy who was no longer only human and no longer only dragon. His battle was just beginning. The nebula shook with violence. Dragons filled the skies, their wings carving through clouds of crimson dust. The swarm of krill ships pressed forward, blotting out the stars with their sheer number. Their screeches carried across the void, sharp and unrelenting. This was not a raid. This was a war. And at the center of it all stood Lior, the child once abandoned, now armed with both dragon strength and human will. Vaynor's massive body glowed with fire as she soared above the sanctuary. Her roar carried command and courage to every dragon within hearing. Defend our home. Defend each other. Her words rang like thunder, answered by 100 more roars that rolled across the nebula. Lior stood on the ledge of the cavern city, his dragon-forged armor gleaming in the fiery light. The weight of the blade in his hands steadied his trembling heart. He could feel the eyes of his kin on him, not as an outsider, but as one of them. Kalor landed beside him, scales glinting black in the shifting light. This is the moment we trained for, Kalor growled. Fight with everything you are, not as their weapon, but as our son. The first wave of krill crashed against the defenders. Dragons met them head-on, fire streaming from their jaws, claws tearing into the armored hides of the ships. Explosions burst across the sky, scattering shards of metal and flame. Lior leapt into the battle, his harness carrying him into the air, gliding through the chaos as if he had wings of his own. He struck with precision, his blade piercing weak points in the bioships. Every strike burned with more than skill. It carried fury, defiance, and the will of one who refused to be claimed by darkness. Kalor fought beside him, unleashing a storm of claws and fire, protecting him even as he drove Lior to push harder, fight stronger. But the swarm was endless. For every enemy cut down, 3 more appeared. The sky became a storm of fire and shadow. Vaynor roared, unleashing a torrent of emerald flame that ripped through a line of ships. But her strength began to falter under the relentless assault. Wounds opened across her scales, yet she fought on, refusing to fall. In the distance, the massive command ship loomed. It pulsed with strange energy, its body larger and darker than the rest. Liar's eyes locked on it, his chest tightening. He knew with a certainty that the swarm would not stop until that ship was destroyed. Worse, he sensed its purpose. It had not come to kill the dragons. It had come for him. Kaelor saw the direction of his gaze. You feel it, don't you? That ship is their mind. Cut it down, and the swarm will falter. Liar nodded, though fear pressed at his heart. He was only one human, even with dragon training. But destiny had never asked him if he was ready. It demanded that he act. With a deep breath, Liar dove toward the command ship. Fire trailed behind him, the roars of dragons echoing like a chorus of courage. The ship unleashed a barrage of energy beams, each one crackling with deadly light. He weaved through them, his harness straining, his body pushed to the edge. Explosions erupted around him, but still he flew forward. He landed on the hull, his blade glowing with heat from dragon fire. Striking again and again, he cut through the armored plating until he reached the heart of the vessel. Inside pulsed a core of living matter, a grotesque fusion of flesh and machine. Voices whispered from it, cold and sharp, calling him by name. You are ours. Return to us. Fulfill your design. Liar's hands trembled. For a moment, doubt clawed at him. Was he only what they claimed, a weapon built to serve? Then he remembered Vaynar's gentle eyes, Kaelor's harsh guidance tempered with care, the laughter of the dragons who had called him brother. He remembered that he had chosen love over despair. He raised his blade. I am not your creation. I am my own. With all his strength, he drove the weapon into the core. The explosion that followed tore through the command ship, ripping it apart from within. Light brighter than any star burst outward, sweeping across the battlefield. The swarm faltered, their ships falling lifeless, their screeches cut short. Silence slowly settled over the nebula, broken only by the heavy breaths of dragons who had survived. Vayner descended, her body scorched, but her eyes bright with pride. Kaelor landed beside Liar, his chest heaving, his voice low but steady. You did it, not as their weapon, but as ours, as yourself. Dragons gathered around, their massive forms casting shadows across the glowing nebula. For the first time, they bowed their heads not in pity, but in respect. Liar, once an abandoned infant, now stood as both human and dragon in spirit. He was not a child of war, he was a guardian of peace. Yet as the last fragments of the command ship burned away, Liar knew this was not the end. The krill would rise again. The shadows of war would return. But he also knew something greater. He was no longer afraid. His destiny was not chained to the past. It was shaped by the fire he carried within, a fire born of love, defiance, and hope. In that moment, the nebula no longer seemed like a place of exile. It felt like a beginning. Liar lifted his gaze to the endless stars and whispered to himself, steady and clear, I will fight for life. I will fight for family. And I will fight for tomorrow. The fire of destiny had been lit, and its light would guide the galaxy for ages to come.